All right, guys, welcome to 1 o'clock and the third in our series of Q&A webinars to support the Child Care Capacity Accelerator process. My name is Sarah Gardner. I am with the KU Center for Public Partnerships and Research. We support the Children's Cabinet. I will be kind of monitoring the chat a little bit today. I'll be putting some links in there, which include the application and the resources that are online. So that's where all of this stuff lives. And then my final note is that we are recording all of these webinars. And so that information, all the recordings will live on the Accelerator webpage as well. So I'm going to toss it over to Lucas and he can kind of walk you through how we will manage the Q&A today.
Well, glad to see so many folks joining us, and it really, we want to give people time to ask the questions that you have and to learn together. We did do a presentation on the first webinar, so if you haven't had an opportunity to look at that, you might, probably not concurrently, but might take that opportunity this afternoon or over the weekend. The one thing that I do want to say that has come out of some conversations over the last week is, if your app, as soon as your application is complete, go ahead and submit. Don't wait until May 15th because we will start a first review once they are submitted, and that gives us an opportunity to possibly come back to you and say, we see this, we see a different mix might be appropriate. This is particularly interesting because you might be in the middle of a capital project and you might be asking us for capital dollars, but as we look at your timeline, realize, boy, you'd be a really great operations ask. And so if you submit early and we have an opportunity to look at that and maybe to help you reshape your ask or make sure that what we think maybe as we look at your ask and say, oh, it looks like maybe it should be a little bit different, make sure that makes sense to you so that we can help. But getting those in earlier helps us to be able to do that. So with that, who's got questions for us?
I will kick us off. I have a question that Carrie sent me. Wanted to ask, if the grant is awarded, will we have to pay taxes on the amount received? And Carrie, if there's any other clarification, you're welcome to come off mute and ask that.
So we are not accountants, but our anticipation is that if you are a for-profit entity, so not a school district, not a government, not a not-for-profit, that you will likely have tax liability with the grant. Yes.
So I have a question. Sorry. Regarding the budget.
Okay.
So when is there a date that you have to have the funds your end has to have the funds obligated, and a date that we have to have expended or drawn them down, a final date?
The final date to have submitted invoices to pull them down. I mean, the absolute final date is well, it'll depend on the source. For operations, it's September of 2024, and for capital, it's September of 2026. That's the absolute end.
September 30.
Sorry.
September 30.
Sarah, is that correct?
Yeah, and Bonnie, that's for the state to liquidate. So it's likely that we will, in a grant award agreement, would have at least a 30-day backup from that.
Okay.
But to Lucas's point, it does depend on what funding sources we will use to actually award or fund your grant.
And everything's on a reimbursable basis, correct?
Yes.
That's what I thought.
I was wanting to know, with our project, we've started construction, but we haven't, we're about a third way in, we haven't really done much more to it. Should we not so much halt production, but slow down our production in order to make sure that the funds that we could get would cover the cost of our construction as well?
That's going to be a very personal decision. That's a very personal decision that you need to make. We cannot reimburse for things that have been invoiced before an award, so that would be a reason to halt and wait. Another approach would be to shift away from a capital ask and to focus on crafting a good operations ask.
So on the operations ask, does it actually cover construction, or does it cover more of like desk and chairs and?
Yeah, so operations would not cover construction. It would cover equipment. So desks, chairs, curriculum, manipulables and toys and playground equipment. And then also, the costs that you have when you staff up a facility, training costs. Some of your positions you're going to need, depending on how many people you're talking about. But it's easy to imagine having some people that you would need on site a month before you'd have any kids in your building, and you're going to have a need to have teachers before each of those rooms is full of kids.
Right.
And so a good operations ask, kind of tells a story about who you need to pay when, and how you transition then to other sources of funding. Sarah, are you going to handle chat for me in
Yep.
terms of reading those in for me? I appreciate that.
Yep. If we have an estimate for a new building, what will happen if the cost increases during construction? And my assumption is this is asking about if they're awarded, what happens between submission and actual construction.
I would not anticipate that your award would change. As I think about how we're going to have to administer these funds, I would not anticipate that the award will change, which means building that risk into your overall budget, and not being shy about your request, but also having some other plans around what kinds of financing might be available to you for those risks, or other partners to help with that risk. It's a real thing. My project in Lindsborg, a lot of you know that I've sat on your side of the screen. We bid it the week that lumber went through the roof when was that? May of 2021. And my $2.1 million project suddenly was a $2.9 million project, if I remember correctly. So that I had a couple sleepless weeks, but and that's the reality. And I wish that I could say, hey, we're going to set. I suppose we could just set money aside. That's not what we're going to do. We want to fund as many good projects as possible, and so we're going to ask for each of you to assume a little bit of that risk.
Christina, if you have other questions from that, I know you noticed the background noise, just put them in the chat and I will re-up those. Next question, Lucas, if we have already hired an architect and contractor, but have not started construction, but would use part of the grant funds to pay for either, how do we navigate the sort of procurement requirements and the RFP, RFQ, or hard bid process? And NG, if I have misread your question or you want to add clarity, you're welcome to come off mute and do so.
So if we're not paying for your architect, no problem, right? If you say you're not going to use our funds for your architect fee, that's no problem. On the contract, that gets into kind of the core of a capital project. If you've already entered into a contract, and Sarah, you stop me, because you stop me if I'm saying something I don't want to say. I would think that if you went through a process, if you went through a bid process, you can tell us that. And
Yeah, I
that would
would,
be really helpful.
yeah, and we are not telling you what to do with your procurement policies per se. We are just asking that you have something solid that you can explain. So I'm just thinking about, you know, if you already have an architect and a contractor and you went through a you know, a solid process to get both of those vendors, then just tell us what that was in your application.
And yeah, it also, you know, if the ask would be to the point that you're going to trigger the single audit, I think that also would be something to consider.
And that single audit is $750,000, and that's across all federal funding sources. So if you're leveraging other federal dollars for your project, just keep that in mind, and that's all in the RFP. Next question from Teresa: when do you know when we would be awarded the grant to start the project?
We anticipate making the awards mid to late June.
Next question: we already own a building, but we only occupy 50%. We are remodeling the other 50% to add 5 classrooms. As far as operating expenses, can we only apply for the 50% of the remodel portions for operating, or for the full 100% of the building for operating?
You can apply as you like. I think in terms of like what's the most compelling competitive application, I would say it's that 50% that you're adding. But you know, if you have to add some support staff in the building, like I would also be generous towards yourselves in how you allocate the costs of being just a bigger operation. I'm glad it's not all at once, but who's got a question for us?
Sorry, I'll jump in here. Probably easier to speak it than type it. If we're building a building or want to build a building, do we need the contractors or plan like a plan wrote out, or just have it in our head that this is what we want? Does that make sense?
To apply for construction capital funding, you very much need to have
Right.
a plan and a plan that has been submitted to KDHE and to the fire marshal.
Okay, so the plans need to be sent to
ADHD.
before you guys would approve or before we apply?
Yeah, that's the expectation, that that's part of the application for May 15th.
Okay. All right. So KDHE and fire marshal. Okay, thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of the community champion?
Bonnie, where are you at? geographically?
Southeast Kansas.
Southeast Kansas. Are you, so generally that community champion, in some ways that if you are a single center and you're in a county where you're pretty confident that nobody else is applying, you're the community champion. The community champion, and Sarah may stop me, but I think as we have put together this application, the RFP, the champion is the applicant. It is a single entity, single person who's going to be our point of contact through the project. I think part of what we were looking for is that the person who submits the application is also then going to oversee the project, that we're not going to have a cold handoff to somebody else. There's also the hope that in some communities, there may have been this really robust discussion, community convenings and putting together something that totally reflects the considered opinion of the community. And the community champion language, I think, comes out of that a little bit too. But don't let that stop you from applying. I think attached to that is, please, if you're an independent center, please be looking for support from your city council, your county commission, other childcare providers in your community to help. We don't know the whole. We don't know every community in the state, and we want to make sure that we're not being asked to fund something that's duplicative.
Just an extra layer to that too, Bonnie, is the need for sustainability. And again, thinking about what we called this, we named this the Accelerator for a reason, and that it's not the solution to all your childcare problems at a local level. And having a community champion, the intent is to help further those and deepen those conversations inside the community, however it's defined, to garner additional support and garner ongoing support to help be really collaborative and sustain the childcare that's being built or expanded with this money, but also help kickstart additional support that might be available. So
Okay, because I was reading it as someone in addition to the applicant, someone in your community, but thank you for the clarification.
Thank you for the opportunity, Bonnie. So there's a question: if the fire marshal can take up to 30 days, can we submit our initial plans to the fire marshal and make minor changes after? I am asking because I've done this several times, and I know that I often make changes several times, and the architect process can take 30 or more days as well. I mean, I think realistically the answer is yes, right? In a couple different ways. One is I don't know what I don't know. So I don't know if you're going to be changing it. The other reality is that it's a rare project that goes all the way through construction without a change. And so that's just part of life. So that the whole thing has to be operational at the end, though, too. So, and the fire marshal is a big piece of that. I also, well, I'm not sure what you're asking for from the Office of the State Fire Marshal is I think generally a pretty high level view of the plan. Are there exits? Is the square footage generally correct? And so you really shouldn't be making any changes that would surprise the fire marshal then. But yeah, that's absolutely correct. If you make change, well, the fire marshal is going to come through at the end, right? And observe what you actually built and either allow you to use your building or not.
Yeah, it's a plan approval. So I'm putting an example in the chat of what that might look like. So this is not plan for occupancy or approval for occupancy. So just, I know there are nuances, and those of you who've done this know how to navigate the Office of the State Fire Marshal. But they know about our project. They know about this funding opportunity. They're very aware. They're very supportive. So if you have done your due diligence and your work on time and you're running into some challenges, certainly reach out and let us know that. But we want to make sure that you've gone far enough to get that sort of overall plan approval from KDHE and the fire marshal plan review approval as well. And all of these samples are in the attachments tab of the online application. So.
Another question? Will requests under $250,000 be considered? So if you are adding capacity, yes. Competitive applications are going to be appropriately scaled to their community's need for additional childcare. And so that means that in some communities, you'd be really, it would be hard probably to get to that $250,000. In some of the counties with lower populations, but please consider the scale of your project in relationship to the need for childcare in your community as you're submitting that. Let's see. Do we need to show proof of getting estimates from several contractors, or if we already have one for a project that we trust, can we use them and just get one estimate? Please don't do that. That is not that does not align to federal contract or federal procurement standards. So you really do need to get multiple bids and have a procurement policy. Since our application is from our county child care task force, we have both operational and capital requests. Is there an issue with one application requesting both? Not at all. No, please. And if somebody has an aggressive construction schedule, you know, if you're able to break ground in June and be open by and be open, particularly if you had a renovation, so you're not pouring a slab, you know, it's not difficult to imagine that there would be projects that would be, we're going to renovate something and get operational and spend both asks by August or September of 2024. And that's a great ask. Please make that request. My husband is my contractor and he built my first building. Do I still need to get bids? Honestly, under federal procurement standards, that's not a great request. And you know, federal procurement standards are really set up to prevent you from using your brother-in-law or whatever, or your husband. And so this, I totally support you using your husband. This source of funding might not be the right source of funding in that instance. Will applicants be awarded the full amount requested, or is it possible to only be awarded a partial amount? I think that's going to depend on applications. If it's clear that your project only works with the full amount requested, but it's a really good project, you know, the rest of your funding is really solid. I don't, depending on the timeline, you know, this money has to be spent. And so in that situation, I don't know that we would do a partial. If it's operational and, you know, I think it's more likely that there might be a partial amount. But it's really important to us that this money actually be able to be used. So we do not want to make an award where you're still trying to track down 25% of your project's costs, because there's too much uncertainty for us there in terms of actually getting this money spent. How do you spend operational money without the building being completed first? Yeah, you can't. You're correct, Margot. If I have several projects, would it be best to have separate applications for each project? I don't think so, unless unless they were in different regions of the state, then it might be might make sense. But if you're in the same region, I think even if you're in two counties next to each other, getting it into one application makes sense, in my opinion. And it's all about telling us, you know, a really compelling story to the review committee about how that works.
I'd also take into consideration who your fiscal agent is. And if you have one fiscal agent across multiple projects, it's better for us to make one award
Absolutely.
than multiple. And you know, but to Lucas's point, use your judgment on how those are spread out and not spread out, and how they're managed and not managed cohesively. So.
And yeah, with one fiscal agent, even if you're in 3 parts of the state, 3 really separate regions, It just means, adding those letters of support, but that can still, with one fiscal agent, be one application. Do you contact your local fire marshal or the state fire marshal? The state fire marshal. In the budget that was just added yesterday, I believe, there is a list of what is operational funds and what is construction. Other questions? How can I surely is some way for me to make this more useful for everyone. The way that I'd like to make this useful for everyone is to have you ask questions. On the last webinar, you mentioned bank financing could be counted as cash. However, the fact sheet online states it is considered in kind. I would have to pull that up, but debt financing, am I missing something, Sarah? Debt financing is cash.
That's right. Yeah. So Angie, if you could maybe email us offline or put a link to where you're seeing that language, we would want to make sure that that is not the case. Absolutely, bank financing is cash. And thanks for bringing that up.
That in-kind piece is really on things that are subjective to the value to the project. Anything where there's no subjectivity to its value, that becomes cash. Teresa, I'd when using federal funds, there's just some risk to what you're proposing. There's some risk to what you're proposing, and in terms of that, the accountability to the federal government and to the Kansas legislature. There's some risk there. Stephanie, if you currently rent but the owners want to sell, can these funds be used for that with the plan to extend the building? We have not precluded purchase of real estate, have we? I don't think we're excited about purchasing real estate. I'm really not excited about purchasing, because you do need to control it. Now, you could show in your application control of real estate through through a right of first refusal, even, really. But that plan to extend the building, that needs to be part of your ask, because you've got to be adding capacity. That's the threshold. Teresa, you can absolutely still apply for operational funds.
Lucas, there's a question about if we add slots to the community and can't find staff to keep the slots open. What do we do about that scenario?
There's no clawback anticipated. So I'm not going to show up. I'm not going to show up with a baseball bat. Say, why haven't you staffed those spots? There's a lot of work being done in communities across the state and at the state level to think about what are different, both like tactics and what are some system-wide improvements that can be made to help with staffing. We certainly do want to see spots not only built, but also filled with staffing. Can I expand on the project organization chart? We're looking to see what roles you have in your organization and who is in those roles. What are their qualifications in those roles? In a group home, that project organization chart isn't going to have a lot of spots on it. We understand that. Conversely, in a nonprofit childcare center, would like to know who's on your board. Would like to know what qualifications they have to be on your board. Would like to know who the staff are and what roles they fill in your center.
Juanita, it's particularly important for the project organization chart if you have a complex project in terms of partners, right? If you have one entity that's a fiscal agent and you have another entity that's project managing it, you have another entity that's leading operations. When there are larger projects that might have that level of setup, particularly if they're multiple partners in the community coming together, that's where the org chart I think is really, really helpful.
Also,
otherwise it might just be your organization's sort of org chart, so it's a little bit of confusing if you're a single applicant and you've got everything soup to nuts in-house. If you don't, though, that org chart can be really helpful. And NG, thank you very much. I will make that change on the FAQ.
We have lots that have been donated for early learning center to be built upon. We have attached quick claim deed. How do we get the dollar amount for the in-kind donation amount? So I would look at your county's assessed value and add those up. My worry is staffing as well. So to clarify, that is not necessarily something that needs to factor in when deciding whether or not to apply for this grant. It doesn't, it shouldn't be a total limiting factor. But if, I also think it's difficult. It will be difficult to put together a competitive application that says my current building is already half empty because I can't staff it and I want to add rooms. That's a difficult story to tell. And it probably just isn't a competitive application. But if I request capital for a building to be built, will the state be the owner? No. Nope. Other questions? Maybe to go back when I assume, but we all know what happens when you assume. When I talk about the county assessed value, that would be a matter of going to your county's website and it should, I would think for most counties, it is something that you get to online, but you should also be able to call your county assessor, county appraiser, and ask for some guidance in getting to those amounts or how to get to those amounts. We have a single family 3-bedroom home that we are using now as our group daycare, but it needs some renovation and updates to make more room for capacity wise. Do I just submit a floor plan for what needs to be done? Yes. And you'll want to be judicious in thinking about how that relates to the overall capacity need in your community. With all the requests regarding construction furniture, et cetera, has the state considered helping with inflated costs by offering to bulk order kids furniture or certain common building materials that everyone will need to assist on cost in a high inflationary period? That is not something that we have considered. There'd be pros and cons to that approach, and we've not chosen to take that approach. Other questions? We are a school district looking at building a daycare. Are these funds available for school districts? Yes, they are. We're looking for childcare slots that are full-time, full year. So that is part of the threshold, is running childcare that is responsive to the workday and that is year-round. But certainly there are school districts in the state doing that, and we're excited for that. Excited to see those applications. Thank you, Francie.
There's a question about what does reporting look like? Reporting yearly numbers, etc. If you want, I can take that one, Lucas.
Yeah, I think you've built that out.
Yeah, it's reporting to clarify the status of the project. So depending on what your project is, your reporting will look a little bit different, but the basic outcomes we are looking for are slots, and that there are workers to support those slots, that you are increasing the ratio of slots that versus need in your community. So basically those goals and target outcomes that are in the overall guidance document and that's on the website, that is what we are looking for you to report on when it's all said and done. But during the process, during the project, we would want to see that you are making strides towards the goals that you wrote in your application. So there's actually a tab in the application that asks you to state at least 3 goals, and we want you to be able to speak to those in your reporting.
Bonnie asks, does an application get more points if they enroll DCF families and use the child and adult care food programs? Yes. Now, there's lots of pieces of the application, but generally, we're trying to figure out how to staff facilities and how to have rates that are affordable for different families. And that DCF is definitely making use of various subsidies is definitely part of how we achieve that goal of making attainable childcare. Can ARPA dollars be used for match dollars? And I think I'm confident that the answer is yes, strangely. But yeah, if your county or city is committed ARPA dollars to the project, that's great, which is unusual for federal money.
The one exception to that, I would note, is if you are counting anything coming out of sustainability grants from DCF, because we are also using DCF, CCDF money for this grant, and we cannot duplicate funding. So it would probably not be the case if you're specifically calling out ARPA dollars for your match. So that's the only caveat. Otherwise, yes, Lucas is 100% right. We want you to leverage the other dollars that you've been able to get from your city or council or municipality.
What if we have the land to build new to add extra to our community? Because in our small area, we only have 3 small daycares and waiting lists are full all the time. That's an exciting project. I think it'll be a sprint at this point. We're 6 weeks out, but if you can get a plan together to build new, yes. Yep, that's great. Other questions? Well, if there aren't more questions, I hate to, I know folks are busy. Some of you are watching kids. I know one of you has kids to drive to a track meet. I don't want to use time that you don't have. So if there are no more questions, we'll end this. I would, want to encourage folks to use the technical assistance request form. That is really helpful in terms of our ability to track requests and to populate our FAQ. And I think, can I get some testimony? I think we're doing a pretty good job of getting back to folks. So if I can get some raised hands, some amens, I'd appreciate that. And continue to reach out with questions. Get your application in as early as possible so that we can provide feedback, ask questions. If you ask a detailed question, I think I'm willing and able to provide detailed answers to encourage you. If I see that from everything you're telling me and my knowledge of our RFP and application, that it sounds like your project is an operational project, please hear that and consider submitting that application or vice versa. Or we want you to be successful. We don't want to waste your time, and we want this to be a successful process for everybody. So.
We will get the recording up online, and we'll get these questions added to the FAQ as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.